One of the most misunderstood aspects of human relationships is that people often do not fully recognize the value of something while it is constantly available to them. This isn't always because they are careless or ungrateful. In many cases, it is simply a result of human psychology. Familiarity can sometimes reduce awareness. When someone is always present, always reachable, and always part of daily life, their importance can become woven into the routine. And when something becomes routine, people may stop consciously appreciating how much it contributes to their happiness. This is one reason why no contact can have such a powerful effect. When communication suddenly stops, the constant presence disappears. The conversations end. The daily check-ins are gone. The familiar connection that once felt ordinary is no longer there, and in that silence, something interesting begins to happen. The distance creates clarity. Think about how often people only realize the importance of certain things after they are gone. A favorite place doesn't feel special until you leave it behind. A meaningful friendship doesn't always reveal its value until life creates distance. The same principle often applies to relationships. When someone is no longer part of a person's daily routine, the mind suddenly has room to notice what is missing. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as contrast. Human beings understand value more clearly when they experience the absence of something they once had. As long as the connection is constantly available, it can blend into the background of everyday life. But when it disappears, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. For a man, no contact often removes distractions that previously prevented deeper reflection. During the relationship or communication period, daily responsibilities, work, social obligations, and countless other demands may have occupied much of his attention. Even if he cared deeply, he may not have fully examined his feelings because there was no reason to. The connection was simply there. Once that connection is gone, however, reflection often begins. The silence creates space for thought. Memories that were once overlooked become more noticeable. Conversations that seemed ordinary suddenly feel meaningful. Small moments begin returning to his mind. He starts remembering things he hadn't thought about in weeks or months. What's fascinating is that people rarely miss someone because of a single dramatic event. More often, they miss the collection of everyday experiences they shared. The familiar good morning messages, the laughter during ordinary conversations, the comfort of knowing someone was there, the support during difficult days. These seemingly small moments often reveal their true value only after they disappear. Another important reason distance creates clarity is that emotions become easier to evaluate without constant interaction. While a relationship is active, feelings can become mixed with frustrations, misunderstandings, expectations, and temporary conflicts. These immediate emotions sometimes make it difficult to see the bigger picture. When no contact begins, many of those immediate emotions gradually lose intensity. What often remains are the deeper memories and emotional truths beneath them. A man may start asking himself questions he never seriously considered before. Why did that connection matter so much? Why do certain memories keep returning? Why does life feel different without her presence? This process doesn't happen for everyone, and it doesn't happen instantly. But when genuine feelings existed, distance often gives those feelings an opportunity to become clearer. The absence removes noise. It removes routine. It removes assumptions. And in that quiet space, appreciation can grow. Perhaps the most important thing to understand is that no contact is not powerful because it manipulates someone into returning. Its power comes from creating an environment where reality becomes visible. It allows both people to see the relationship more clearly than they could when they were standing in the middle of it. And sometimes, when the distance finally reveals what was truly there all along, a man returns not because he suddenly changed overnight, but because the silence helped him recognize a value he could no longer ignore. One of the biggest reasons men return after a period of no contact has very little to do with logic and almost everything to do with emotion. Many people assume that when a man comes back, he is simply missing the person. While that can certainly be true, what often has an even stronger effect is that he begins missing the emotional experience that existed when that person was part of his life. This is an important distinction because people do not just form attachments to individuals, they form attachments to feelings. Every meaningful relationship creates an emotional environment. There are certain emotions, experiences, routines, and moments that become connected to a specific person. Over time, The brain begins associating that individual with those positive feelings. During a relationship or close connection, these emotional experiences often become part of everyday life. There is laughter during difficult days. There is support when things go wrong. There is comfort during stressful moments. There is excitement when sharing good news. There is the simple feeling of knowing someone understands you. Because these experiences happen regularly, people sometimes stop noticing how valuable they truly are. Then no contact begins. Suddenly, the emotional environment that once existed is gone. The conversations stop. The support disappears. The familiar presence is no longer available. At first, a man may focus on practical changes. He notices that communication has ended. He notices the silence. But as time passes, something deeper often starts happening. He begins missing how he felt when that person was part of his life. Psychologists often refer to this as emotional association. Human beings naturally connect emotions to people and experiences. If someone consistently made us feel understood, appreciated, encouraged, or happy, those feelings become linked to them in our memory. Even after the relationship ends, the emotional associations often remain. This is why certain memories can suddenly return months later. A song, a place, a conversation, or even a random moment can trigger emotions connected to the relationship. What the mind is recalling is not merely the person. It is the emotional experience attached to that person. Think about how often people remember feelings more vividly than specific events. Years later, someone may not remember every conversation they had with a particular person, but they remember how safe they felt. They remember how much they laughed. They remember feeling understood. They remember feeling accepted. Those emotions leave a lasting impression because they become part of the emotional story attached to the relationship. For many men, no contact creates enough distance for those emotional memories to become more visible. During daily life, distractions often keep attention focused elsewhere. Work, responsibilities, friends, and routines occupy the mind. But when the connection has gone long enough, the emotional benefits that person provided can become easier to recognize. He may start realizing that very few people made him laugh the same way. Very few people understood his perspective so naturally. Very few people brought the same sense of comfort into his life. These comparisons happen automatically because the mind is trying to understand why something feels missing. What's fascinating is that people often underestimate the power of emotional comfort until they lose it. Excitement can be found in many places. Distraction can be found almost anywhere. But genuine understanding, emotional support, and authentic connection are much harder to replace. This is why some men return after no contact. They are not simply chasing memories. They are responding to the realization that the emotional experience they shared was more valuable than they originally understood. They begin recognizing that certain feelings are rare, and rare things are difficult to replace. Of course, not every connection leaves this kind of impact, but meaningful relationships often do. When a genuine emotional bond exists, the memory of those feelings can remain long after communication ends. Time may create distance, but it does not always erase emotional significance. And sometimes what brings a man back is not just remembering who you were. It is remembering how deeply, peacefully, and authentically he felt when you were part of his life. One of the most powerful reasons men often return after a period of no contact has nothing to do with manipulation, games, or tactics. It has everything to do with human psychology and how people react when familiar patterns suddenly disappear. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that their presence will always be available. When communication becomes part of everyday life, it often starts feeling permanent. The mind becomes accustomed to it. It expects it. And because it expects it, it rarely stops to question what life would feel like without it. That is why no contact can create such a dramatic shift in perspective. It breaks a pattern that was once predictable. Suddenly, the routine changes. The messages stop. The updates disappear. The familiar connection is no longer there. And when something that once felt certain becomes uncertain, attention naturally follows. Human beings are creatures of habit. We become comfortable with routines, relationships, and familiar experiences. Whether we realize it or not, our minds build expectations based on repetition. If someone has always been there, we begin assuming they will continue to be there. We stop noticing their presence because it feels normal. It becomes part of the background of everyday life. Then something unexpected happens. The routine is interrupted. Psychologists have long observed that people pay more attention to changes than to constants. A clock ticking in the background eventually fades from awareness because it remains consistent. But if that ticking suddenly stops, people notice immediately. The absence captures attention because it breaks an established pattern. The same principle often applies to relationships. When a woman who was once consistently present suddenly becomes unavailable, the pattern changes. And that change creates curiosity. Curiosity is one of the strongest psychological forces in human behavior. The mind naturally seeks explanations for unexpected events. It wants to understand what changed. It wants to resolve uncertainty. This is why silence can sometimes attract more attention than constant communication. When communication is ongoing, there is very little mystery. Everything feels predictable. But when contact ends, questions often begin appearing. What happened? What is she doing now? How is she feeling? Has she moved on? Is she happy? These questions arise because the brain dislikes unfinished stories. What's fascinating is that the silence itself often becomes more noticeable than the conversations ever were. During the relationship, daily communication may have felt ordinary. After no contact begins, however, the absence of that communication stands out. The brain notices the missing pattern and begins focusing on it. This doesn't mean every man immediately rushes back. Human emotions are complex, and every situation is different. But what often happens is that the interruption forces reflection. The connection is no longer running on autopilot. It is no longer something he can take for granted. Instead, he becomes aware of its absence. Another important factor is that people often appreciate things more when they realize they are not guaranteed. Familiarity sometimes creates complacency, not because someone doesn't care, but because certainty can reduce awareness. When that certainty disappears, appreciation often increases. You may also notice that no contact removes the opportunity for constant reassurance. There are no updates, no reminders, and no ongoing interaction maintaining the connection. This creates a situation where memories, emotions, and personal reflection become much more important. Without new conversations to focus on, the mind often revisits old ones. Over time, this process can lead a man to recognize the true significance of what was lost. The silence becomes impossible to ignore because it represents more than the absence of communication. It represents the absence of a person who once occupied an important place in his daily life. And sometimes, when no contact breaks the pattern he always expected to continue, he finally notices just how much that pattern meant to him all along. One of the most revealing things that happens during a period of no contact is something many people never see. While life appears to move forward on the surface, the mind often begins making comparisons. A man may meet new people, focus on work, spend time with friends, or explore new opportunities, but human psychology has a natural tendency to evaluate experiences against past ones. And sometimes it is only through comparison that people truly recognize the value of what they once had. This doesn't happen because someone is sitting around intentionally analyzing every detail of a past relationship. In fact, it often happens naturally and unexpectedly. A conversation with someone new may remind him of a conversation he used to have with you. A social gathering may highlight a quality you brought into his life. A difficult day may remind him of the support he once received. These moments create emotional comparisons that are difficult to ignore. The reason this happens is simple. Human beings understand value through contrast. We often don't realize how meaningful something was until we experience life without it. During a relationship, certain qualities can become familiar. They become part of everyday life. Because they are consistently available, they may not seem extraordinary at the time. Then the relationship ends, life continues, but the qualities that person brought into daily life are no longer present. At first, the absence may not feel dramatic, but as time passes, situations arise that highlight what is missing. That's when comparison begins. Psychologists have long observed that people evaluate experiences relative to previous experiences. We don't judge things in isolation. We compare them to what we already know. If a man shared a connection that provided understanding, emotional support, laughter, trust, or genuine companionship, those experiences become part of his internal standard for future relationships. When new experiences fail to create the same emotional depth, he may begin noticing the difference. Perhaps he realizes that conversations don't flow as naturally. Maybe he notices that very few people understand him the way you did. Perhaps the emotional comfort he once took for granted suddenly seems rare. These realizations don't always happen all at once. More often, they emerge gradually through repeated experiences. What's particularly powerful is that emotional comparisons are often stronger than logical ones. A person may meet someone who looks impressive on paper, but if the emotional connection feels weaker, the comparison becomes difficult to ignore. This is because human beings are deeply influenced by how experiences make them feel. Many people assume attraction is based solely on excitement or physical chemistry. While those facts matter, long-term emotional impact often comes from qualities that are harder to replace. Feeling understood, feeling accepted, feeling supported, feeling comfortable being yourself. These experiences create emotional value that extends far beyond initial attraction. As no contact continues, a man may begin realizing that some of the things he thought were common were actually rare. The way you listened, the way you encouraged him, the way you made ordinary moments enjoyable, the way you understood things without lengthy explanations. These qualities may not have seemed extraordinary while they were consistently available, but their absence often reveals their true importance. Another interesting aspect of comparison is that memory tends to highlight meaningful emotional experiences. Over time, the mind often focuses less on minor frustrations and more on the moments that created genuine happiness and connection. This doesn't mean people forget challenges completely, but emotional distance often provides a broader perspective. As a result, appreciation can grow. What once felt ordinary begins looking special. What once felt familiar begins looking rare. And what once seemed replaceable begins feeling much harder to find. This is why some men return after no contact, not because they failed to move forward, but because moving forward helped them recognize the value of what they left behind. Through new experiences, new conversations, and new perspectives, they begin seeing the previous connection more clearly than ever before. Because sometimes it takes losing a meaningful connection and comparing it to everything that comes after to realize just how difficult that connection truly is to replace. One of the most powerful truths about no contact is that its greatest benefit often has nothing to do with getting someone back. In fact, the real transformation usually happens within the person practicing it. While many people begin no contact focused on another person, they often end up discovering a stronger version of themselves. And interestingly, that personal growth is one of the reasons men sometimes return. When a relationship ends or communication stops, there is often an immediate temptation to focus entirely on the other person. Questions fill the mind. What are they thinking? Do they miss me? Will they come back? What are they doing now? These thoughts are understandable because emotional connections naturally create emotional investment. However, no contact creates something that many people rarely give themselves: space. Space to think. Space to heal. Space to grow. Space to redirect energy away from constant worry and toward personal development. At first, this process can feel uncomfortable. When someone has been an important part of your daily life, their absence creates a void. Many people instinctively want to fill that void by seeking reassurance, checking for updates, or focusing on what they lost. But when no contact is maintained, something different begins to happen. The energy that was once directed outward slowly begins turning inward. Instead of focusing on someone else's choices, a person begins focusing on their own life. They invest in their goals. They strengthen their confidence. They develop new habits. They improve their mindset. They spend more time with friends and family. They reconnect with interests that may have been neglected. Gradually, life starts becoming fuller and more meaningful. Psychologists often explain that confidence is deeply connected to independence. When people realize they can be happy, fulfilled, and successful without relying on constant validation from someone else, their self-respect grows. They begin carrying themselves differently. Their energy changes. Their perspective changes. This transformation is often noticeable, even from a distance. One reason men sometimes return after no contact is because the dynamic they once knew no longer exists. The person they remember is no longer standing still waiting for attention or approval. Instead, they see someone who has continued growing, evolving, and building a fulfilling life. Human beings are naturally attracted to confidence. Not arrogance, not pretending not to care, genuine confidence. The kind that comes from knowing your worth, regardless of another person's decisions. This kind of confidence creates a powerful presence because it reflects emotional strength. What's fascinating is that growth often makes a person more attractive because it shifts the focus away from chasing and toward living. Instead of trying to convince someone of their value, they begin embodying that value. Their actions communicate self-respect more effectively than words ever could. Another reason this growth matters is because it changes the emotional energy surrounding the connection. Relationships often struggle when one person feels dependent on the other for happiness. But when someone develops a strong sense of self, they bring a different kind of energy into interactions. They become more balanced, more secure, and more emotionally grounded. A man who notices this change may become curious. He may see someone who appears happier, stronger, and more fulfilled than before. He may realize that the person he once knew has evolved in meaningful ways, and that realization can be surprisingly powerful. Of course, the goal of personal growth should never be to make someone return. Real growth happens because it improves your life regardless of what anyone else does. The irony is that when people genuinely focus on themselves, they often become more attractive than when they were focused entirely on the relationship. This is because self-respect has a quiet power. It communicates strength without needing to announce it. It creates confidence without needing validation. And it shows that happiness is coming from within rather than from someone else's attention. And sometimes when a man sees the confidence, independence, and growth that emerge during no contact, he doesn't just notice that you've changed. He realizes he may have underestimated the value of someone who learned how to thrive without him. After distance creates clarity, after emotional memories resurface, after familiar patterns are broken, and after personal growth changes the dynamic, there is one final reason why some men return after a period of no contact. It is perhaps the simplest explanation, yet it is often the most powerful. Sometimes they return because the emotional connection never truly disappeared. One of the biggest misconceptions about relationships is the belief that time automatically erases meaningful feelings. While time can certainly heal wounds, create perspective, and help people move forward, it does not always eliminate the emotional impact of a genuine connection. Some experiences leave a lasting impression because they become woven into a person's emotional memory. Think about the people who have had a significant influence on your life. Years may pass. Circumstances may change. You may no longer speak regularly, yet certain memories remain vivid. Certain conversations still carry meaning. Certain emotions remain connected to that person. This happens because meaningful connections affect us on a deeper level than ordinary interactions. Psychologists often explain that emotionally significant experiences are stored differently in the mind. They become attached to memories, emotions, personal growth, and important life moments. As a result, they tend to remain accessible long after the experience itself has ended. This is one reason why a person can suddenly think about someone months or even years later and immediately feel a strong emotional response. For some men, no contact does not erase the bond because the bond was never built solely on convenience or routine. It was built on emotional experiences that carried genuine significance. The relationship may have ended, communication may have stopped, and life may have moved forward, but the emotional impact remained. This is where it becomes important to understand the difference between attraction and emotional connection. Attraction can be immediate. It can be exciting. It can capture attention quickly, but attraction alone often fades when circumstances change. Emotional connection is different. It develops through shared experiences, mutual understanding, trust, vulnerability, and meaningful moments. When a man forms a deep emotional connection, he often carries pieces of that experience with him, even after the relationship ends. He remembers how conversations felt. He remembers the comfort of being understood. He remembers the emotional support during difficult times. He remembers feeling accepted for who he was. These memories do not disappear simply because communication stops. In many cases, no contact actually reveals how strong the connection was. When someone is part of daily life, their importance can sometimes blend into the background. But when they are gone and the emotional impact remains, it becomes difficult to ignore. Another reason genuine emotional bonds endure is because they often become connected to personal growth. Certain people enter our lives during important chapters. They support us through challenges, encourage us during difficult periods, or help shape the person we become. As a result, memories of them become linked to significant parts of our own story. When a man reflects on his life, those connections may naturally return to his mind because they represent more than a relationship. They represent experiences that influenced him emotionally. Of course, not every relationship creates this kind of lasting impact. Some connections are based primarily on circumstance, attraction, or convenience. When those factors disappear, the connection often fades as well. But relationships built on genuine emotional depth tend to leave a much stronger impression. This is why some men return after months or even years of silence. They are not necessarily responding to loneliness or nostalgia alone. They are responding to the realization that certain emotional experiences have remained meaningful despite the passage of time. The connection stayed alive in memory because it mattered. And ultimately, that is the difference between a temporary attraction and a lasting emotional bond. Temporary attraction captures attention for a season, but genuine emotional connection leaves an imprint that time cannot easily erase. Because when a man returns after no contact, it is sometimes not the silence that brought him back. It is the realization that the feelings attached to a truly meaningful connection never completely left.